Is that the thing that was on your face when you woke up? Are you sure you're okay?
It was already dead, O'Neill. I'm fine.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
The Alien franchise. It is one of the most popular sci-fi franchises of all time, being up there with Predator, Star Wars, and of course Star Trek, but the franchise has a bit of a fresh fruit vibe from a grocer, starting off really well, and then it got perfect ripe, and then it slowly started to age and become a bit rotten. What I mean by that was, Alien was fantastic, and it still is fantastic, and Aliens, in some instances, and to some fans, is even better, and then Alien 3, while it's not as good as the previous two entries of course, that's where the franchise started to go downhill to where we got Michael Fassbender playing with himself.
I'll do the fingering. Go on.
We got it now. It's alright.
But well, what about outside of the movies? Well, there have been heaps of comic books and action figures and yes, video games. And with the new release of Aliens Dark Descent that a lot of people really like, I did try to do a video on this and, well...
This guy... This is not my kind of guy.
Now, while I'm glad so many people enjoyed Dark Descent, it just didn't really work for me. And seeing how I've already covered Aliens Fireteam Elite, I thought why not take a look at one of the most controversial and poorly launched video games of all time with Aliens Colonial Marines, which this year turns 10.
Happy birthday to Gabe.
Oh, get out, Skeleton Man.
Published by Sega and developed, if you will, by Gearbox Software, but mainly subcontracted out to Timegate Studios, Demir Studios, and Nerve Software, Aliens Colonial Marines is full of controversy over what developer made what, and it kinda shows with the gameplay.
Fuck!
But there are 1001 videos out there from other channels talking about what went wrong with this game's launch, from showing us gameplay footage that didn't even take place in the game, basically showing us a game that didn't exist, to game-breaking bugs and xenomorph animations that are still, to this day, broken and goofy.
I can't, it's broken! It's broken!
But 10 years after its release, and being known for one of the worst video games to release, especially with a beloved IP, is Aliens Colonial Marines that bad?
Yes.
Heads up though, this is a review from what you get when you simply purchase and download the game. There isn't any mods or changes to any typos in the source code. I like to review games on what developers and publishers release, and to see if they themselves go back and do or change anything post-game's launch. But if people enjoy this video and want me to, I might go back and take a look at that Templar GFX mod. Colonial Marines takes place after the events of Alien 3, a movie that some people love, especially after seeing the 2003 assembly cut. Now the game starts with a SOS call from Hicks, and shortly after we find ourselves on the USS Sulaco, the Colonial Marine ship from the film Aliens, that yet again is above the planet of LV-426. And the last time we saw it, it was above the prison planet Fury 161.
Sir, the Sulaco was reported last seen over Fury 161. How is it back over this planet?
I don't know.
We play as Corporal Winters of the USS Sephora, arriving some odd 17 weeks after the events of Aliens. Our job is simple, to investigate the Sulaco, but also find a missing Marine battalion who were instructed to find the flight recorder on the Sulaco. After investigating the Sulaco, we find that somehow the ship has become a breeding ground for xenomorphs. The previous battalion of Marines have all been captured, impregnated, and well, that's where our aliens come from, but also there's Weyland-Yutani soldiers on board too, because it wouldn't be an Alien game without Weyland-Yutani soldiers after all. Following this, we save a Marine in a hive who proceeds to do dumb shit like throwing a grenade in a missile bay to blowing up the airlock umbilical to the Sephora with a grenade as the chestburster pops out of him. Honestly, this guy should have been a giant red flag during his military training.
Forget about the badge! When do we get the freaking guns?
From this, we find ourselves stuck on the Sulaco, finding some surviving Marines, and crash down on LV-426, and obviously being after the events of Aliens, the colony of Hadley's Hope is still there, but well, it's been wrecked from the atmospheric processor, which while cool, I'll come back to in a bit. But as we progress in Colonial Marines, we find out that Hicks survived his off-death screen in Aliens 3, which is one of the few things Colonial Marines tries to shake up in its lore. But sadly, it doesn't really go anywhere. It does try to explain how the alien egg gets on the Sulaco to start the events of Alien 3, and how Hicks survives. But it's all really done through the DLC for the game, which, I will say, has a better overall story than the main game, and the cutscenes are nowhere near as janky. It's just a bit of a shame that you need to do the DLC to understand how Hicks survives. But back to my earlier question, how is Colonial Marines 10 years later? Well, when it originally released, I played it on launch day and I raced down to my nearest store and I played the shit out of it when I got home. It was buggy and completely broken, but being a fan of the series, I found myself sort of role-playing into the game to enjoy myself, and I'm having to do the same thing this time around. Now, there is a lot wrong with Colonial Marines, but there are some things that are done pretty well, and firstly, it's the environments and the atmosphere, especially for the familiar areas. When arriving on the Sulaco for the first time, you can't help but explore, and if you're a fan of Aliens, which is really the only reason you'd play this game, but seeing Bishop's legs that somehow didn't get sucked out of the airlock, or the Marines' lockers and the sleeping pods is pretty damn cool, and you can read what Marine had what locker as well. When arriving on Hadley's Hope and seeing familiar environments and even just the atmosphere, it's clear that some developers were Aliens fans. Honestly, the start of the game until say after Hadley's Hope is just pulling on fans' member berries, and I won't lie, it actually kinda works, at least it did for me.
Over there! Yeah! Ready? Yeah!
Clear copy.
Right, Jim, look out!
The sound design too works pretty damn well in that the music is obviously being pulled straight from the film while also creating some of its own tones too. The pulse rifles sound like pulse rifles, the motion tracker has its iconic sound, and the eerie, creepy sounds you get from being in an alien hive is actually kinda cool. Now, what I'm about to say might be stupid, I'm aware of this, but some of the introductory atmosphere, especially when you first explore the Sulaco with the horror undertones, reminded me of Doom 3, the first handful of minutes or so before Aliens Colonial Marines starts to fall to shit. The other cool thing is that when you stand next to a character and they're talking, you hear them, but if you start to go a little bit of a distance away from them, the conversation turns into a comms call or a radio call. I know it's something small, but I thought it was kinda cool. But what the gameplay probably gets right, in my opinion, is the motion tracker. In other games, the motion tracker is just on the HUD, and having it as a physical item just like it is in the film is a great touch. But you can't use your weapons while you're holding up the motion tracker. Again, just like in the films. And yes, the motion tracker kinda helped with being able to immerse yourself or roleplay into this world. There are smaller things too, like being able to weld doors shut and use the welder to free people who are stuck in a hive. So while the game itself starts to fall apart, I found myself leaning on immersing myself into the role and playing in this alien's world, but, well, what's the gameplay like? Colonial Marines is a first-person shooter action game that has some horror undertones here and there, especially in certain moments of the game where it removes your weapons and you need to sneak around. It's only in one moment really, but it tries to recreate some of the survival aspects of facing off against the horrors of the xenomorphs. Being a Colonial Marine, as you'd expect, you've got pulse rifles, shotguns, smart guns, which you only get to use twice in the game. It is completely rad when you're using it, as the smart gun gives you the targeting system and it's actually really cool. It's just a shame that such a fun weapon in the game is only used twice. Thankfully though, the smart gun is in Fireteam Elite and it is rad there. But we also get weapons that we've not seen before, like battle rifles, submachine guns, assault rifles, and with the DLC you get the plasma rifle and the sharp stick rifle solely made from the offhand comment that Hicks makes in Aliens. But from that too, you'll have the undercooked leveling up system with challenges where each time you rank up, you get a skill point to put into your weapon customization, which is kinda a cool idea, sure, but it's also half-baked and slapped together. You can change your pulse rifle's grenade launcher to a shotgun attachment if you want to. You can add scopes and lasers and firing modes for some weapons too, and each weapon has 3 different skins to add some personal flair if you want to your weapons. Now, when I first booted up Colonial Marines 10 years ago, seeing the pulse gun with a magazine of 40 rounds, something felt off because the film has them as 95 round clips. And then I saw the option to increase the magazine and went, cool, sweet, only for it to go to 60 rounds from its original 40. But something that Colonial Marines remembered that Fireteam forgot is the undermounted grenade launcher, and here it actually does come in handy. But the combat itself is a C-grade first-person shooter where you'll find yourself constantly dying from firing your undermounted grenade launcher at enemies for it to clip the top of a box in front of you that it shouldn't have been clipping on to explode and then take you out.
Oh, you son of a...
Or the weapon, the sharp rifle, which is basically an explosive rifle that does wonders when fighting against the Weyland-Yutani soldiers, but when playing with friends or whenever the explosive rifle clips something that doesn't actually exist like an invisible wall, or it hits an ally or an AI teammate who's right in front of you, you go down, and if you're playing solo, you stay down.
You dirty bastard!
But the Xenomorphs also do take a fair amount of rounds from the pulse rifle to take them out, and these are the standard run-of-the-mill warriors. And yeah, there are varieties of enemies, with the warriors being the standard bread and butter, the drone which hides and jumps out at you, a bit like how it does in, say, the first Alien film, the spitters which don't swallow, the facehuggers who pose no real threat in the game sadly, and then there's the Weyland-Yutani soldiers with the standard and heavy variants.
Pretty standard, really.
It's all really generic, and I never found myself going, ah shit, there's a drone around here, like I was when I was playing Fireteam Elite. The overall gameplay too does try to have Call of Duty inspired moments where cinematic things happen, like the USS Sephora exploding, causing the Sulaco to fall apart, and the camera and environments start to shake. And it's kind of cool, but it also sets up some false hope or excitement for the game, because you only really have this at the start of the game. So as the story moves from the Sulaco to LV-426, there are no cinematic environments or anything going on, as sadly as the game progresses, the quality of the combat, environments, story and cutscenes fall with it. There's also long stretches and moments in the game where you face off against nothing but Weyland-Yutani forces, even on an alien-infested ship, and there are moments where it doesn't feel like I'm playing an Aliens game, but a generic space shooter. And at one point I only remembered I was playing an Aliens game when I heard a screech coming from a corridor. Sadly, things just start to get worse and worse for Colonial Marines as well. The story doesn't feel overly fleshed out or well thought through. At least at the time of its original release, Aliens Colonial Marines was supposed to be official canon in the Aliens lore, which made more problems than solutions. Now, while it was great to have Hicks survive in the lore rather than being killed off screen, Hadley's hope and the return of the aliens make near no sense. Now, in the film Aliens, Bishop states that when the atmospheric processor explodes, this is what's going to happen.
With a blast radius of 30 kilometers, equal to about 40 megatons.
In 19 minutes, this area is going to be a cloud of vapor the size of Nebraska.
Look, this whole station is basically a big fusion reactor, right? So, you're talking about a thermonuclear explosion and adios muchachos.
And hell, it's even mentioned in the game itself.
What happened to it, sir?
Best we can tell, the atmospheric processor blew like a 40 megaton bomb.
Now think about that. That does not make sense.
And yet somehow the aliens have survived, as has the colony of Hadley's Hope. It's barely damaged in some instances, and there's power to doors and lights, so explain that. When arriving on LV-426, you see the M577 armoured transport from the film, and it looks completely fine. It looks like you could have hunkered yourself inside Hadley's Hope or the transport and survived the thermonuclear explosion.
Nuclear. It's pronounced nuclear.
And like, yeah, while it's cool to see familiar locations and basically have our character, or characters if you're playing with co-op friends, stuck in a situation similar to the 1986 film, it again makes no sense.
Does it make sense? No.
Now, I've been chatting with a mate of mine who is a bigger Aliens fan than me, and his main point is that this game is fan service, which is all good and well. But if you are making an Aliens game that is canon to the story and lore of the world of Aliens, I think you'd want to be really careful with how you write a story and how you drop Easter eggs. The game does have legendary weapons, like you can use Hicks's shotgun or Hudson's pulse rifle that actually has 95 rounds per clip. You can use Ripley's pulse rifle that has the flamethrower attached, even though it doesn't look like they got it right because the weapons are on the wrong side.
Nerd alert!
And even small things like, say, Gorman's pistol. And while it is a cool little hat tip to fans, personally, anytime I see something that is canon to a world or a universe that I myself am a fan of, when something is off-key like that, it kinda breaks me.
Why are you the way that you are?
Now, we find Hudson's assault rifle not too far from where we find a cocooned and dead Hudson, which I actually thought was kind of a nice touch. But another example is the other legendary weapons that we can be found are nowhere near to where we saw a character last use them. For example, we find Frost's flamethrower in a Weyland-Yutani outpost near the iconic engineering ship, yet Frost last had this weapon when he was attacked in the hive in the atmospheric processor, so surely it would have been destroyed, yeah? But again, this is a personal thing. As I mentioned, when something is made canon in a series that I'm a fan of and it's off, it breaks my brain and I can't see past it. But there is much, much worse than the developers putting in some nice legendary weapons for fans, and it's the bugs, shortcuts in development, and reused environments, the holes in the story, and of course, the boss fights. We'll start with the bugs, and the Xenomorph AI is awful. They'll dash and leap right at you without any thought for self-preservation and act more like zombies in Left 4 Dead, running right at you than the Xenomorphs attacking in waves and rapidly. You'll have allies with you for most of the game, and it's very frustrating to see a Marine who is basically the American badass Undertaker try to take on a single Xenomorph with a smart gun and do absolutely nothing. Now, as I mentioned, there are some great environments in Colonial Marines. The Sulaco and Hadley's Hope have loads of detail placed into the environments. But while the aliens tend to just come out of walls and vents, and behind the vents, and in some instances behind the damaged walls in Hadley's Hope, it is just a black wall with no texture or depth. These walls are generally everywhere, and if you turn your flashlight on to look into any of these vents, it ain't gonna do a damn thing. And Colonial Marines isn't a long game, and after the first act, and maybe after the start of the second act, the story crumbles faster than James Cameron's films post True Lies.
Yep.
After leaving Hadley's Hope, we're going to go help a character called Bella, who is a fellow Marine who's impregnated with a chestburster. The story feels super rushed, and when you finally arrive at a Weyland-Yutani medical lab to try and remove this embryo, Bella learns that you can't just take them out, and she accepts that she's going to die. And while the game tries its darndest to make the scene full of emotion, the characters' faces show no emotion, and it reminded me of Bill Murray in Zombieland after he's been shot.
I think you might pull through.
No.
Hell, the game even has Michael Biehn return as Hicks, and he sounds bored and completely unimpressed. Hell, some of the cutscenes in the film have so much lens flare and shaky cam, it looks like a Michael Bay film. But one of the biggest letdowns are the boss fights in the game. Now, during the second act, you're chased by a special mutant alien known as the Raven, which is a larger alien that has more of an exposed human skull, and you fight it with the power loader. And holy fuck, just look at this fight.
What the hell was that?
But after going through hives and hives of aliens, of course, the end of the game has a final boss fight against the Alien Queen. Now, I played this game with some friends, and this fight was done in a matter of, say, 2 to 3 minutes. And it's not a fight, it's lining up cargo to fire at the Queen so you can shoot her at the side of the ship. Then a cutscene plays, which again, this is at the end of the game, so the quality is as good as a wet paper bag, and that's it, story's over. Now, what hurt the game the most was the E3 preview video narrated by Dandy Randy, which showed off and sold the fans to the game, and if you go back and watch the preview video, it still kinda stings on what we were shown to what we were given.
We're really excited about it. We're big Aliens nerds. Heck, I've been stealing from Aliens my entire career.
And now, yes, there is the general rule of being careful with what you see at E3 compared to actual releases, but the only thing in the E3 video that was in the game was some of the environments. That's it. There was no wicked fight or standoff against the Queen, there's no power loader with the flamethrower, nothing. While the environments are atmospheric, the character models, facial animations, and voice acting is pretty damn poor. But as Aliens fans, if you fully roleplay and immerse yourself in the world, and watch Aliens just before you play this, there is some fun to be had. Thankfully too, the entire campaign can be played 4-player co-op, and like I've previously said, even playing a shit game can be fun if you're playing it with friends. I think it's pretty clear that after 10 years, sadly, Aliens Colonial Marines is still a very shit game.
I am shocked! Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
And yeah, you can have fun with this, and surprisingly, it ran on my widescreen monitor pretty well. But I found myself forcing to roleplay to get any enjoyment out of this game, and anytime I ran into bugs and glitches, it broke the immersion. Even the final cutscene for the game didn't play properly, and I tried it twice.
Fuck!
After we finished with the main campaign, we then tried to go on and move into the DLC, and when we wanted to start the first level of the DLC, it randomly started the last level for the DLC, and it made no sense.
Alright. Well, see you later.
What I think this game needs is a complete, spiritual remake of sorts. Just like how Disney scrapped the Star Wars extended universe and started afresh. Who says they couldn't do the same thing with the Alien franchise? The idea of doing a first-person shooter set in the Aliens universe with some fan service, some familiar locations, or even locations that are new but feel familiar, and expanding the universe or the lore could be done really damn well. But Colonial Marines, sure, there are some players out there that enjoy the game, and whether you played it with friends and you have fond memories from that, or you are a giant Aliens fan and you just enjoyed getting a game set in a world without a predator, awesome, I'm glad you enjoyed it. But Colonial Marines as a core game without the mod does not work at all. It's got some great ideas like the motion tracker and some areas of fan service and attention to detail. But there's no other game that I can think of that had this much hype and false advertisement to release this poor. Now while it's been 10 years since Colonial Marines released, we've had some pretty fun Alien games with Fireteam Elite, Dark Descent, which some of you enjoyed and I might have to go back to and try again, and the fantastic Alien Isolation. But we've not had a return to the first-person shooter Alien game since this, and hopefully it doesn't take another 10 years to actually return to first-person shooter Alien games. But whether you've been a fan of Alien since as long as you can remember, or you've recently found the series, always remember to play with each other and play with yourself.